You're paying for this. Right. Maris? After all, family takes care of family. My father didn't even look up when he slid a $4,500 dinner bill across the mahogany table. Right next to my glass, 16 relatives went dead silent, waiting for me to cry or blindly pull out my Visa card. I just smiled, stood up, and executed a cold counterattack that left my father's credit completely ruined before midnight. Welcome back to Her Dignity Stories. If stories about self-respect, quiet justice, and drawing hard boundaries against toxic family members are the reason you are here tonight, please hit like and remember to subscribe to the channel. And please let me know in the comments below. Where are you watching from? I truly want to know which corner of the world this story is reaching tonight. Now, grab yourself a warm cup of tea, find a comfortable seat, relax with the peaceful countryside view, and let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Maris Dean, and I am a 35-year-old commercial credit risk analyst living here in Portland, Oregon. I grew up believing that a family table was a safe place, but last night, inside that private VIP room at the Benson Hotel in downtown Portland, I realized it was just a financial trap. The air in the room smelled like garlic butter, expensive wine, and pure betrayal. 16 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting for my submission. My mother, Lillian, was busy smoothing her silk blouse, avoiding my gaze entirely after promising me last week that this dinner was her treat to heal old wounds. My younger sister, Savannah, sat right in the center, flashing a smug smile that told me everything I needed to know about where the money was really going. Come on, Maris, don't make this awkward. My uncle chimed in from the end of the table, holding up his empty wine glass. Your father said you did really well at the bank this quarter, so don't be selfish. They thought the sheer pressure of the extended family would lock me in a corner, but looking at that massive bill, my mind didn't panic. It went completely cold. I didn't look at the total amount. I looked at the legal print at the top of the receipt. I saw the exact banquet order number and the little star symbol that indicated a pre-authorized corporate guarantee. Suddenly, the knot in my stomach disappeared, replaced by a sharp, quiet clarity. I looked up, met my father's arrogant stare, and let out a small, calm laugh. Instead of reaching for my wallet with shaking hands, I wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, folded it neatly, and stood up without saying a single word. I picked up my keys, gave Savannah a polite nod, and walked right past my parents straight toward the double glass doors where the restaurant manager was waiting. To understand why I walked away last night, you have to go back exactly 3 years. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in October when the first financial trap was set. My sister Savannah had this ridiculous dream of opening an aesthetic espresso bar downtown. She wanted velvet couches, neon signs, and expensive Italian espresso machines that cost more than a used car. She had no business plan. She had no savings. She had zero experience running anything beyond her Instagram account. But the local credit union refused to grant her a commercial loan without a solid cosigner. That was when my father called me into their living room. The air in that house always felt heavy, like an unpaid utility bill. My father sat in his worn leather recliner, holding a stack of loan documents. He looked at me and said, Maris, we need you to sign an unconditional personal guarantee for $95,000. I took the paperwork and looked at the interest rates and the default clauses. As a credit analyst, my brain immediately flagged the red lines. If Savannah failed, and I knew she would, the bank would come after my assets, my savings, and my personal credit score. I looked my mother in the eyes and said, I can't sign this. Mom, it's too high risk. The room went freezing cold. My mother stood up from the sofa, her face twisting into pure disgust. How can you be so selfish? she hissed, slamming her coffee mug onto the table. "Savannah is your sister, and family helps family." My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. "You think you're better than us just because you wear a suit to a bank?" I tried to explain the math, the debt-to-income ratio, and the market reality of small coffee shops in Portland. They didn't want math. They wanted blind obedience. I stood my ground, grabbed my keys, and went back to my apartment. I thought that was the end of the argument, but 2 days later, I drove by their house after my shift at the bank. When I pulled into the driveway, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. There were 3 large, black, heavy-duty trash bags sitting right on the wet grass of the front lawn. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was standing by her mailbox, staring over at them. I got out of my car, my boots sinking into the muddy grass, and ripped the first bag open. Inside were my childhood yearbooks, my high school diploma, and the silver academic trophies I had won. They had cleared out my old bedroom, packed every single memory of my existence, and dumped it on the grass like garbage. My father came out onto the front porch, holding a coffee cup, completely unbothered. "Since you don't care about this family, you don't need your things in this house anymore," he shouted across the yard. Savannah stood right behind him near the screen door, smirked, and took a sip from her mug. The humiliation burned so hot in my chest I couldn't even breathe. They wanted the whole neighborhood to see me as the ungrateful, cold-hearted daughter. I didn't say a single word back to them. I quietly loaded those heavy black bags into the trunk of my sedan while the cold Oregon rain soaked through my coat. That was the exact moment something broke inside me forever. I drove away, blocked their numbers, and didn't speak to them for 3 long years. For 3 long years. My phone was a sanctuary of silence. No text messages on Thanksgiving, no missed calls on my birthday. I thought we had finally reached an unspoken agreement that the damage was permanent. Then, last Tuesday, at exactly 4:15 p.m., my screen lit up with a number I had unblocked but never expected to see again. It was my mother, Lillian. I sat at my desk at the bank, staring at the flashing screen while my morning coffee turned cold in its mug. My hand shook just a little bit as I swiped the green bar to answer. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. "Maris, is that really you? Sweetheart?" Her voice didn't sound like the cold, screaming woman from 3 years ago on the lawn. It sounded thin, fragile, and completely broken. She let out a shaky breath that sounded like she had been crying for hours. "Maris, please don't hang up on me. I'm begging you." A tight knot immediately formed right in the center of my stomach. My analyst brain told me to press the red button and walk away. But there is this tiny, stupid part of your heart that always wants to believe a parent can change. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice as flat as a financial ledger. She swallowed hard through the speaker. "It's your father. Maris? He had to go into the clinic downtown for some serious cardiovascular tests this morning. The doctors found some blockages, and we've been sitting in the waiting room for 6 hours." Hearing that made my chest tighten up against my will. Arthur Dean was always this loud, immovable force who looked like he would live forever. Hearing that his heart was failing felt like a sudden shift in gravity. "Is he going into surgery?" I asked, my professional armor cracking just a tiny bit. "Not yet, but the scare made him realize how empty our lives have been," she whispered. "He spent all afternoon talking about you. Maris? He remembers what he did with the trash bags, and he hasn't slept a full night since that rainy Tuesday." She paused, and I could hear the distant beep of medical monitors in the background. "We don't want the bank loan. We don't want your money. We just want our oldest daughter back. Life is simply too short to keep carrying this heavy grudge to our graves." She told me they wanted to host a small, quiet reconciliation dinner this week. Just the 4 of us. Mom, Dad, Savannah, and me. She said they booked a private space at the Benson Hotel restaurant downtown because it was quiet and close to the clinic. Every single red flag in my mind started screaming at maximum volume. The Benson is one of the most expensive historic venues in Portland. My parents are middle-class retirees who constantly complain about the price of eggs at the grocery store. I don't think a luxury hotel is a good idea. Mom, I said, leaning back in my office chair. If Dad is sick, he should be resting at home, not spending money on fine dining. That was when my mother dropped the ultimate bait, her tone perfectly warm and reassuring. Oh, don't you worry about the cost for even 1 second. Maris, your father already settled everything with the hotel management using his special savings account. The reservation is fully taken care of. The dinner is entirely on us, and your wallet stays in your purse. We just need you to show up. Sit down and let us buy you a nice meal to say we are sorry. Hearing her say those exact words, that they were paying for everything, finally made me lower my guard. In the corporate world, when a client guarantees the funds up front, the risk drops to zero, I thought to myself. If they are willing to spend their own cash just to see me, maybe this apology is 100% real. Okay, Mom, I sighed, rubbing my temples. I'll be there at 7 o'clock on Thursday. Thank you. Sweetheart, you have no idea how much this means to your father, she said before hanging up. I put my phone down on the desk, my heart thumping hard against my ribs. I spent the next 2 days trying to convince myself that people could actually grow up and feel genuine remorse. I truly wanted to believe that the woman on the phone was a mother looking for forgiveness. But when I finally walked through the gold revolving doors of the hotel that Thursday night, I realized I had made a catastrophic mistake. After I hung up the phone with my mother, the emotional haze cleared within minutes. I am a risk analyst, and my brain naturally rejects unverified data. You don't survive in commercial banking by letting a few tiers dictate your financial exposure. The reality of middle-class America in 2026 is brutal. Inflation is squeezing every household. Interest rates are hovering at painful highs, and credit card debt nationwide has hit a record high. Average families are drowning in high-interest balances just to keep up appearances. My parents are no exception. They live on a fixed pension and a diminishing 401k. So, the idea of them casually hosting a dinner at the Benson Hotel made absolutely no mathematical sense. I opened my work laptop at my kitchen island, skipped my usual evening routine, and started digging. First, I pulled up the commercial registry for downtown Portland small businesses. I typed in the name of Savannah's aesthetic coffee shop. My screen flashed with a red regulatory status flag. Her business hadn't just slowed down. It had completely dissolved. The city had issued a commercial eviction notice, and the business license was revoked exactly 6 months ago. My parents had completely hidden this massive failure from me during that entire emotional phone call. They spoke about Savannah like she was still a thriving entrepreneur, but she was functionally broke. Next, I investigated the venue they chose. The Benson Hotel doesn't operate like a casual diner where you just split the check at the counter. For private VIP rooms and group bookings over 10 people, their policy is incredibly strict. They require an upfront event banquet order, or an EBO. The person making the reservation must sign a binding legal document. They have to link a primary credit card for a pre-authorized hold to cover the minimum spending limit. I knew this because my bank handles the merchant services for that exact hospitality group. I sat back in my chair, watching the cursor blink on my screen while the rain tapped against my window. The puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. And it wasn't a picture of family healing. It was a beautifully packaged, high-stakes ambush designed to force me into a corner. They were going to use the public setting to trap me into paying off whatever debt Savannah had manufactured. But knowing the rules of their trap gave me a distinct, cold advantage. In my line of work, once you identify the source of risk, you don't run away from it. You position your assets. You verify the documentation. and you let the liability fall back on the original borrower. I closed my laptop, packed my leather work bag for the next day, and felt my pulse steady completely. I was going to that dinner, but I wasn't going as a vulnerable daughter looking for a hug. I was going as a senior auditor attending a highly predictable default hearing. I put on my coat, turned off the kitchen lights, and prepared myself for Thursday night. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Benson Hotel at exactly 10 minutes to 7. The lobby smelled like old money, polished oak, and expensive floral arrangements. I took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of my black leather purse on my shoulder. I kept telling myself that this was just a quiet dinner to hear a medical update about my father. The hostess checked her reservation book, gave me a polite smile, and led me toward the back. We walked past the main dining area and stopped in front of a heavy wooden door marked VIP Suite B. The hostess opened the door for me, and I stepped inside, expecting to see 3 familiar faces. Instead, the wall of noise that hit my ears made me freeze instantly on the carpet. The room did not contain a small, quiet family gathering of 4. There was a massive, long banquet table stretching across the entire length of the private room, and packed around that table were 16 people, talking, laughing, and clinking glasses. My heart stopped completely, dropped into my stomach, and turned to ice. It was my entire extended family. Uncle Marcus from Seattle, Aunt Clara, cousins I hadn't seen since college, and relatives I barely recognized. These were the exact same people who had completely ghosted me for 3 long years. Not one of them had sent a text when my parents threw my belongings on the lawn. Not one of them had checked to see if I was surviving after being publicly discarded. And now, here they were, acting like they were attending a high-profile holiday celebration. The chatter died down for a split second as they all turned their heads to look at me. "Maris, you finally made it!" My mother, Lillian, cried out, stepping forward with an empty smile. She didn't look like a woman who had spent the week crying in a hospital waiting room. She wore a brand new silver necklace, her hair perfectly styled, smelling of expensive perfume. My father, Arthur Aka, was sitting near the head of the table, looking incredibly robust and healthy. He didn't have any medical monitors, no paleness, and certainly no signs of a cardiovascular crisis. He was laughing loudly, a glass of top-shelf bourbon gripped firmly in his thick, unshaking hand. The sudden realization hit me like a physical punch right in the center of my chest. There was no medical emergency. There was no scare, no hospital waiting room, and no genuine maternal remorse. The entire phone call last Tuesday had been a meticulously scripted, emotionally manipulative lie. I stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of their calculated betrayal. And then, my eyes locked onto the absolute center of the long table, and the real twist revealed itself. Sitting right there, practically glowing under the crystal chandelier, was my younger sister, Savannah. She wasn't broke. She wasn't hiding in shame. And she certainly didn't look like someone whose business had just been evicted. She was wearing a brand new, designer silk dress that must have cost at least $800. Her acrylic nails were freshly done, glittering under the dining lights as she raised her hand. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look nervous. And she didn't look like she owed anyone a dime. She just flashed me a smug, incredibly satisfied smile and waved her fingers casually. "Hey, big sis, you're late. We already ordered the first round of drinks," she called out cheerfully. The relatives around her laughed, nodding along as if we were all best friends. They had used my father's fake illness as the ultimate bait to drag me into this room. They wanted an audience, and they needed me trapped in front of 16 witnesses. I felt the blood rushing in my ears, a hot wave of anger threatening to break through my professional composure. But I looked at Savannah's expensive dress, looked at my father's bourbon, and forced my hands to stay completely still. The ambush was fully set. But they didn't know I already understood the financial math behind their little trap. The hostess gently closed the VIP room door behind me, locking me inside their theater of hypocrisy. I took the only empty seat left at the far end of the long table, right next to the dessert cart. Nobody stood up to hug me. Nobody asked how my 3 years had been. Instead, the waiters began rushing into the room like a well-choreographed military unit. They carried heavy silver trays loaded with triple orders of garlic butter Maine lobsters. They served sizzling platters of American Wagyu ribeyes that cost $150 a plate. My Uncle Marcus immediately reached for a fresh bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet, pouring it generously into everyone's glass except mine. My mother, Lillian, tapped her water glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "Let's raise a glass to our beautiful Savannah," she announced, her eyes shining with fake pride. She has been working so hard, unlike some people who choose to stay distant from their own blood. A soft murmur of agreement went around the table, and 16 pairs of eyes looked down at my plate. My father, Arthur, leaned over his steak, chewing loudly before adding his piece. "Maris likes her corporate tower too much to care about regular family gatherings," he scoffed, shaking his head. The passive-aggressive remarks kept coming with every single course. They used the classic family guilt trip, wrapping their toxic words in smiles and jokes. I sat there completely still, my hands resting flat on my lap under the white linen tablecloth. The air in that room felt so thick and suffocating I could barely swallow my water. I watched my relatives devour the expensive food, laughing, gossiping, and treating me like an outsider who was just allowed to watch. But the true nature of their trap revealed itself when the second bottle of wine was opened. My aunt leaned across the table and whispered loudly to my cousin, "It's so wonderful that Savannah is finally getting a second chance with her new boutique business venture. And it's so beautiful that her big sister is stepping up to sponsor the celebration tonight." My heart froze, then began to beat with a dangerous, icy clarity. They hadn't just invited the whole family to show off. They had told everyone that this entire 5-star banquet was my treat. They manufactured a lie to make me the financial savior of Savannah's next failed dream without my consent. All 16 people in this room were eating Wagyu and lobster on the assumption that my banking salary was covering it. If you found yourself trapped at a table like this, surrounded by your own blood who looked right past your face but stared deeply into your wallet, what would you do? Would you swallow your pride, play the good daughter, and hand over your hard-earned cash just to avoid making a public scene in a crowded hotel? Or would you draw a hard line right then and there, no matter how loud the family screaming got? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know how you handle this level of emotional manipulation, and if you believe that nobody should ever be used as a financial doormat by their own parents. Take a split second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Your support helps keep these stories of self-respect alive. Now, back to that suffocating dinner table, because the trap was about to spring open. I looked at Savannah, who was currently clinking her wine glass against my father's bourbon. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had ruined her first business, and now she was using my parents to force me into funding her lifestyle. The anger burned hot in my throat, but I forced it down, converting the emotion into pure, calculated strategy. They thought the social pressure of 16 relatives would break my defense. They thought my guilt would make me weak, but they didn't realize that in the financial world, when a borrower acts with this much fraud, you don't negotiate. You just look at the contract, look at the liabilities, and let the system crush them. The tension in VIP Suite B reached its boiling point when the dessert carts arrived. The waitstaff silently cleared the empty lobster shells and the steak platters. They placed small plates of molten chocolate cake and espresso cups in front of everyone. Nobody was talking about Savannah's failed coffee shop anymore. Nobody was talking about my father's fake heart condition either. They were all just full, drunk on expensive wine, and waiting for the trap to snap shut. That was when the head waiter stepped into the room holding a black leather folder. He walked straight to the head of the table and placed it gently next to my father's elbow. The entire room of 16 people went dead silent. The only sound left was the quiet clinking of my uncle's dessert spoon against his porcelain plate. My father, Arthur, didn't even open the leather folder. He didn't check the itemized breakdown of the seafood or the liquor charges. He just took a slow sip of his bourbon, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and picked up the folder. With a completely flat expression, he slid that black folder across the long mahogany table. It slid past my aunt, past Savannah, and stopped right over my water glass. "You're paying for this, right, Maris?" my father said, his voice loud enough to echo in the quiet room. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "After all, you're single, you don't have kids, and you make the most money at the bank." 16 pairs of eyes shifted from my father's face straight to mine. The sheer calculation of it made the blood in my veins turn to pure ice. He said it so casually, like he was asking me to pass the salt shaker. He didn't ask me privately. He didn't pull me aside before the dinner to check my financial limits. He waited until he had an audience of 16 relatives to execute this public shaming. They all sat there, holding their breath, weaponizing their collective silence against me. They expected me to get flustered, to blush with embarrassment, and to quietly pull out my credit card to avoid a scene. I looked at the black folder. Then I looked across the table at my mother, Lillian. My hands stayed completely flat on my lap, hidden beneath the tablecloth. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice incredibly quiet and steady. "You called me on Tuesday, crying about Dad being in the clinic. You told me that this dinner was fully taken care of by your savings account. You told me specifically that my wallet was staying inside my purse tonight." I wanted her to say it out loud in front of the witnesses they brought. I wanted to see if she had even a single ounce of maternal honesty left in her body. Instead, my mother didn't blink. Her warm, fragile phone voice vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp sneer. She slammed her dessert spoon down onto the table, making her wineglass rattle. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Maris, don't start with your financial accounting nonsense again," she shouted. "Your father and I raised you for 18 years in our house. We paid for your shoes, your food, and your braces when you were a child. Now we have a beautiful dinner with your own flesh and blood, and you're going to count pennies? How can you be so incredibly cold-hearted to your own parents over a simple family meal?" The hypocrisy of her words hit me like a physical blow, but it didn't make me weak. It did the exact opposite. The last remaining shred of guilt I carried for 3 years dissolved into nothingness. She had lied about my father's health just to get me into this room. She had lied about the payment just to get 16 people to order the most expensive items on the menu. And now, she was trying to rewrite history to make me look like the villain in front of the extended family. Savannah sat right next to her, looking down at her fresh acrylic nails, hiding a victorious grin. My Uncle Marcus shook his head, looking at me with disapproval. "Come on, Maris, your mother is right. Family is family," he muttered under his breath. They all thought they had me perfectly backed into a corner. They thought the social pressure of 16 people would force me to surrender $4,500 just to escape the room. But as I looked at my mother's angry face and my father's arrogant posture, a strange wave of calm washed over me. My heart stopped pounding. My mind became completely sharp, detached, and operational. I wasn't their little girl who needed their approval anymore. I was a commercial auditor looking at a fraudulent loan application. And in my world, when the counterparty acts with this much bad faith, you don't argue with them. You just look at the fine print. You look at the liabilities. And you let the contract do the talking. I looked at my father, let out a very small, pleasant laugh, and picked up my leather purse from the floor. They all leaned forward, thinking I was finally reaching for my banking card to settle their expensive debt. Instead, I stood up, tucked my purse firmly under my arm, and looked down at the black folder. "I'll be right back," I said with a polite smile that made Savannah's grin vanish instantly. I walked out of the VIP room, closing the heavy wooden door behind me, leaving 16 people celebrating a victory they hadn't actually won yet. I didn't let the heat show in my face. In my line of work, the moment a client starts screaming is the moment you win, as long as you stay quiet. My mother was still breathing heavily across the table, her face red from her sudden outburst. My father sat there, leaning back, looking like a judge who had just handed down a final sentence. The rest of the family stared at their dessert plates, completely refusing to look at me. I didn't look at them either. Instead, I reached out my hand and calmly pulled the black leather folder closer to my water glass. I didn't open it to look at the total amount. I already knew the number was $4,526. My eyes went straight to the very top edge of the white paper receipt sticking out of the leather sleeve. There was a small, printed barcode and a 3-letter acronym sequence. EBO 09442. That stands for Event Banquet Order. Right underneath that line, there was a small gray box with a check mark next to the words, Pre-Authorized Corporate Hold. My banking background kicked in with a sudden, beautiful wave of icy clarity. To secure a private room for 16 people at the Benson Hotel, the policy is absolute. You cannot just call and hold a room with a verbal promise. The hotel requires the person making the reservation to fill out a formal credit card authorization form. They require a binding legal signature acknowledging responsibility for the minimum food and beverage spend. My father had signed that exact form on Monday morning. He had linked his personal Visa card to that banquet order just to get the hotel to open the VIP doors. He knew the rules. He just assumed he could trick the waiter into sliding the final bill to me at the table. He thought I would panic under the pressure of 16 relatives and put my own card inside the folder. He thought my guilt would make me stupid, but looking at that gray checkmark, I realized my father had unknowingly handed me the exact weapon I needed. I looked up from the folder and let out a soft, pleasant breath. The suffocating weight in my chest vanished completely, replaced by the sharp focus of an auditor who just found a massive accounting fraud. "You're right, Mom," I said, keeping my voice incredibly gentle and level. "It is a beautiful dinner, and we shouldn't let money ruin a family milestone." My mother's chest deflated a bit, a look of smug satisfaction returning to her eyes. My father gave a tight nod, thinking his public shaming tactic had successfully broken my defense. Savannah picked up her wineglass, her smile turning victorious again. They all thought I was preparing myself to absorb the financial hit. "I just need to use the restroom to freshen up before I settle everything," I said, smoothing down my blazer. I picked up my leather purse from the floor and stood up from the mahogany chair. "Don't take too long. Maris, the parking meters outside expire at 9, my Uncle Marcus called out. "I won't be long at all," I replied with a polite nod. I turned away from the long table and walked out of the heavy wooden doors of VIP Suite B. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of their fake laughter. But I didn't turn left toward the lighted signs for the guest restrooms down the hallway. I turned right, walking past the main dining room with purpose in every single step. My boots made a sharp, rhythmic sound against the polished marble floor of the hotel lobby. I walked straight toward the front desk, my eyes locked on the brass sign that read, Banquet and Events Management. A tall man in a tailored black suit was standing behind the desk, reviewing a seating chart on an iPad. His name tag read, Thomas, Banquet Director. This was the man who held the original contract for the room. This was the person who enforced the legal boundaries of the Benson Hotel's merchant accounts. I stepped up to the counter, pulled open my purse, and extracted my official corporate banking credentials. I slid my silver business card across the glossy marble surface, right next to his screen. Hello, Thomas, I said, my voice dropping into my firm, professional auditing tone. My name is Maris Dean, Senior Credit Risk Analyst with Regional Pacific Trust. I am currently sitting in VIP Suite B under the banquet order EBO 09442. We need to have a very quick, very private conversation about the payment authorization on that room before anybody leaves this building. The manager looked at my corporate card, looked up at my face, and his polite hospitality smile immediately shifted into professional alertness. The hunt was officially on, and my family was still in the back room drinking their expensive wine, completely unaware that the rules of their little game had just changed. Thomas, the banquet director, looked at my silver banking credentials. He tapped his fingers on the marble counter, his eyes scanning my corporate title. "How can I help you, Miss Dean?" he asked, his voice dropping into a professional whisper. I leaned in slightly, keeping my posture completely rigid and calm. "I am currently a guest in VIP Suite B," I said, pointing toward the hallway. My father, Arthur Dean, slid a $4,500 bill to me at the table. He told the waiter to process my personal credit card for the entire party. "But I want to see the original event banquet order for this reservation right now." Thomas hesitated for a second, then turned to his computer screen. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the digital file for reservation EBO 09442. "Here it is," Thomas said, turning the monitor slightly toward me. The room was booked on Monday morning under the name Arthur Dean. "And look at the billing authorization form," I said, pointing at the signature line. "Whose name is legally bound to this contract? Thomas?" "It's your father's, Arthur Dean," the director confirmed, nodding slowly. "He provided a personal Visa card to guarantee the $4,000 room minimum." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of icy confidence rushing through my veins. "My name is nowhere on that binding authorization document. I never signed a corporate guarantee, and I never agreed to absorb this liability. According to your own hospitality merchant rules, you cannot shift a contract balance to a third party without written consent. So, you will not be sending a waiter to my seat with a credit card machine. You are going to charge the primary card on file right now, as mandated by the EBO terms." Thomas stared at the screen, then looked back at my face with a mixture of surprise and respect. "You're entirely right, Miss Dean," he whispered, adjusting his tie. "But there is something else you should know about this specific transaction." He leaned closer across the counter, lowering his voice even more. "Your father actually spoke to our floor captain about 20 minutes before you arrived tonight. He specifically instructed our staff not to charge his card automatically at the end of the night. He told us he wanted the bill presented manually to you at the table in front of everyone. He explicitly said it was a family tradition for the oldest daughter to settle the account in public." The sheer, calculated cruelty of my father's plan hit me like a wave of cold water. He didn't just want me to pay. He wanted to orchestrate a public trap. He wanted to use the social pressure of 16 relatives to completely strip away my dignity. If you were standing at that hotel counter and discovered your own parents had planned this level of public embarrassment just to drain your bank account, how would you feel? Would you feel completely heartbroken by their betrayal? Or would you just feel furious and ready to fight back? Type heartbroken or furious in the comments below, because I want to see how you would react to this exact moment. And if you believe that a daughter has every right to protect her self-respect from this kind of calculated family trap, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Your subscription keeps this story going. Now, let's look at how this financial trap snapped shut on the person who built it. I looked at Thomas and let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Thank you for telling me that." "Thomas," I said, my voice completely steady, "that settles it. process the total amount of $4,526 against Arthur Dean's card right now.
And I am 35
Do it
years
from this
old.
computer,
6 weeks
right
ago,
here
a
at the front
semi-truck
desk.
ran a red light on
Do not
Highway
send the waiter back
Y84,
into that room
leaving me
until the
comatose
transaction
with-
status reads approved or completed. Let the contract do exactly what it was designed to do. Thomas didn't hesitate for another second. He reached for his desk telephone, called the kitchen terminal, and gave the absolute order to freeze the tableside billing. Then, his finger hovered over the blue button on his screen marked Execute Primary Billing. He clicked the mouse, and the card reader beneath the counter began to whir and buzz. The digital numbers started scrolling, sending a payment request directly to my father's financial institution. I stood there, adjusting my purse, watching the green light on the machine flash in the quiet lobby. The trap was officially closed, and the liability was heading straight back to the head of that mahogany table. I walked back into VIP Suite B and quietly took my seat at the end of the long mahogany table. Nobody looked up when the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me. My mother was still sipping her coffee, looking completely relaxed and victorious. My sister Savannah was laughing at something my Uncle Marcus said. They honestly thought I had just spent 10 minutes in the restroom gathering my courage to pull out my banking card. Exactly 2 minutes later, the heavy doors opened again. Thomas, the banquet director, walked into the room with 2 floor supervisors behind him. He wasn't carrying the black leather bill folder anymore. He was holding a commercial credit terminal and a long printout of a transaction receipt. He didn't walk to my seat at the end of the table. He walked straight to the head of the table and stood right behind my father's chair. "Mr. Arthur Dean," Thomas said, his voice echoing clearly across the sudden silence of the room. "As per the legal terms of your signed event banquet order, we have processed the total balance of $4,526. My father froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What are you talking about?" My father muttered, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. "I told your waiter to hand that bill to my daughter. The contract you signed on Monday mandates that the primary card on file is charged automatically upon event completion," Thomas explained calmly. "We initiated the charge against your personal Visa card at the front desk terminal, and the transaction has been officially declined by your financial institution for exceeding your credit limit." The entire room went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in my uncle's glass. My father dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. "That's impossible," he yelled, standing up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floorboards. "That card has a $5,000 limit and I just checked it last week." What my father didn't understand was how banking communication systems work in 2026. The moment a merchant executes a massive charge that exceeds your limit, the automated credit system flags it as high risk. And since my bank holds the financing on my father's brand new Ford F-150 pickup truck, the credit decline triggered an immediate internal audit alarm, right at that exact second. My father's cell phone on the table began to buzz loudly. A bright blue text notification popped up on his screen from Regional Pacific Trust. It was an automated risk management alert stating that his auto loan rate was being readjusted due to a major credit delinquency event. He stared at his phone, his hands beginning to shake as he realized his credit score was taking a massive hit in real time. "Lillian, check your accounts right now," my father panicked, turning to my mother. But the real twist was just beginning to unfold. Thomas stepped forward, his expression completely professional and unbothered by my father's shouting. "Mr. Dean, because your primary guarantee card was declined, the corporate contract terms are now nullified," Thomas announced. "According to Oregon hospitality regulations for uncollateralized group dining, the debt automatically splits. We have divided the $4,500 balance equally among all 16 adult occupants in this room. That comes out to exactly $282.87 per person. Our staff will now go around the table to collect individual payments from each guest." The silence in the room instantly exploded into pure, chaotic shouting. The same relatives who had spent the last 2 hours devouring lobsters and drinking wine on my assumed budget turned into a pack of wolves. $280? My Aunt Clara shrieked, slamming her purse onto the table. Arthur, you told us this dinner was completely taken care of. I only came here because you said Maris was paying for everything, Uncle Marcus roared, glaring at my father. I am not paying $300 for a piece of steak because your card got rejected. The hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking to watch. The people who were just praising Savannah and calling me cold-hearted were now screaming insults at my parents. My mother tried to defend herself, her voice shaking as she shouted over the noise. It's Maris's fault. She was supposed to pay, she cried out, pointing a trembling finger down the table at me. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The relatives were too busy pulling out their own wallets, arguing with the floor supervisors, and throwing insults across the table. Savannah sat completely frozen in the middle, her face white as sheet as her cousins glared at her expensive silk dress. They realized that her failed business celebration was the reason they were all getting a $300 bill. I sat at the end of the table, leaning back comfortably in my chair, enjoying the pure, quiet satisfaction of the moment. I didn't say a single word. I didn't smile outwardly, and I didn't gloat. I just watched the absolute destruction of their little financial ambush with the cold detachment of an auditor closing a fraudulent account. They wanted to use social pressure to humiliate me into poverty. Instead, their own greed had turned them against each other in front of the entire hotel staff. It was the most honest piece of financial justice I had ever seen. The chaos inside VIP Suite B was still expanding when I pushed my chair back. The heavy wooden legs scraped softly against the carpet, but nobody even noticed. My Uncle Marcus was busy waving his arms, arguing aggressively with the banquet waiter over the price of his ribeye. My Aunt Clara was furiously stuffing her expensive leather wallet back into her purse while muttering curses under her breath. Right at the head of the table, my father sat with his head in his hands, staring blankly at his buzzing cell phone. His pride was completely shattered, and his precious credit score was bleeding out in real time. My mother, Lillian, looked like she had aged 10 years in a matter of 5 minutes. Her perfect silver necklace looked heavy and suffocating around her neck now. I stood up straight, smoothing down the front of my gray business blazer. I felt an incredible, overwhelming wave of lightness wash over my entire chest. The heavy brick that had been sitting in my stomach for 3 long years simply vanished. I walked slowly down the length of the long table, my boots stepping firmly on the floor. I reached the head of the table where my parents were trapped in their own financial mess. I reached down and picked up my black leather purse and my car keys from the side counter. My mother finally looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of intense anger and sudden desperation. "Maris, you can't just leave us like this," she whispered, her voice cracking under the room's noise. "Look at what you did to this family. Look at this terrible embarrassment." I looked directly into her eyes. Then I looked at my father's pale and defeated face. I didn't feel any anger left in my body. I didn't feel any urge to scream, throw insults, or throw their past cruelty back in their faces. When you finally realize your own worth, you don't need to fight people who don't value you. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, my voice completely quiet, clear, and perfectly polite. "Goodbye, Dad." I truly hope Savannah's new business venture is worth the $300 everyone is paying tonight. I gave them one final, calm nod, a formal closing of an account that was permanently overdrawn. I turned my back on them and walked toward the double-glass doors of the private dining room. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the quiet, cool air of the Benson Hotel lobby. The sound of my family screaming and blaming each other faded instantly behind the heavy wood. I walked out through the gold revolving doors and stepped onto the wet sidewalk of downtown Portland. The cool Oregon night air hit my face, smelling of fresh rain and asphalt. I pulled out my phone and opened my ride-sharing app with a completely steady hand. I ordered a standard UberX to take me back to my quiet apartment on the east side of the river. The app showed a black Toyota Camry was just 2 minutes away. Turning the corner near Pioneer Square, I zipped up my coat against the wind and waited near the hotel's concrete awning. But the final act of their desperate theater wasn't completely finished yet. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the hotel burst open behind me with a loud thud. It was Savannah. She came running out onto the wet sidewalk, her expensive $800 silk dress fluttering in the wind. She wasn't wearing her coat, and her fresh acrylic nails were gripping a cheap paper napkin. Her mascara was completely ruined, running down her pale cheeks in messy black streaks. "Maris, wait, please, just stop for a second," she sobbed, grabbing the sleeve of my blazer. Her hand was shaking violently, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated panic. "The hotel is splitting the bill, and Marcus is refusing to pay for my share too. Mom and Dad's cards are completely maxed out because of the bank's automated alert. They are saying I have to stay behind with hotel security until someone clears the balance. Please, Maris, you have to transfer me $1,500 right now. I am begging you. You're my big sister. You can't let them arrest me over a dinner bill." She was crying like a child, using the exact same emotional tears they used on the phone last Tuesday. 3 years ago, I would have panicked, pulled out my savings, and saved her from her own stupidity. But looking at her now, under the bright yellow streetlights of Portland, I felt absolutely nothing. I saw no sister. I just saw a reckless borrower who had finally reached her legal borrowing limit. "Take your hand off my jacket, Savannah," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a winter frost. She looked at my face, saw the total absence of emotion in my eyes, and slowly let go of my sleeve. Right then, the black Toyota Camry pulled up to the curb, its hazard lights blinking softly in the rain. The driver nodded to me from behind the steering wheel. I opened the passenger door, stepped inside the warm cabin, and settled into the fabric seat. Savannah rushed toward the open door, her face pressed against the frame, crying out my name. I pulled the heavy car door shut, cutting off her voice with a solid, satisfying click. I buckled my seatbelt, settled my purse on my lap, and leaned back against the headrest. The driver shifted the car into drive and tapped the accelerator, moving us smoothly into the midnight traffic. Savannah stood on the wet sidewalk beneath the hotel lights, getting smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. I reached out, tapped the power button on the door panel, and rolled the window up all the way to the top. I watched the city lights blur across the rain-streaked glass as we crossed the bridge toward home. I was finally heading back to my own life, my own boundaries, and a silence that money could never buy. I closed my eyes, took a deep, clean breath, and never looked back. The interior of the Uber was completely quiet except for the soft hum of the tires on the wet pavement. I looked down at my hands resting on my leather purse, and for the first time in years, my fingers weren't clenched into tight knots. The heavy brick of family guilt that I had carried around since that rainy Tuesday 3 years ago was completely gone. I watched the neon signs of downtown Portland fade into the distance through the foggy passenger window, sitting in the back of that car. I realized a very hard truth about life and family dynamics. Blood relation gives people access to your childhood, but it does not give them a lifetime license to exploit your hard work. For too many years, I thought being a good daughter meant allowing myself to be used as an emergency fund for people who never respected my boundaries. I thought that swallowing insults and writing checks was the only way to keep the peace at the Sunday dinner table. But peace that requires your own financial ruin and emotional destruction isn't peace at all. It is just submission. My father and mother didn't want a relationship with me. They just wanted a reliable co-signer for their reckless mistakes. They were perfectly willing to use a fake medical crisis and the public pressure of 16 relatives to trap me into compliance. But when you finally stop looking for approval from people who are incapable of loving you unconditionally, you become dangerous. You start looking at the fine print of your life. You establish your boundaries, and you let the financial liabilities fall exactly where they belong. Last night, I didn't get revenge on my family. I simply enforced the legal terms of their own greedy contract. I know many of you watching this tonight are sitting in your own comfortable living rooms, holding a warm cup of tea, and nodding your heads because this story hits incredibly close to home. Maybe you are a parent, a grandparent, or an older sibling who has spent decades sacrificing your own retirement savings for people who only call you when their bills are past due. Maybe you are currently staying silent while your children or your relatives treat your dignity like a doormat because you are afraid of the family drama. I am talking directly to you right now. Do not let anyone weaponize the word family to bleed your bank account dry or strip away your self-respect. You have worked too hard, survived too many storms, and earned every single ounce of your peace to let toxic people tear it down. Setting a hard boundary with your relatives is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. If my story tonight reminded you of your own worth, and if you believe that nobody should ever be financially exploited by their own blood, I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to Her Dignity Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our weekly updates. Your subscription is the direct fuel that helps this channel spread these critical messages of strength to regular people all over the world. If you look at the screen right now, you will see a link to our previous video about a woman who had her entire inheritance targeted by her siblings at a family wedding, and how she used a hidden trust document to protect her future. I highly recommend you click on that video immediately and watch it next, because it provides the exact same analytical roadmap for defending your peace of mind. You deserve to see how other ordinary people are finding the courage to stand up, draw their lines, and walk away with their heads held high. And make sure you stay subscribed, because in our next upcoming episode, we are diving into a completely mind-blowing situation involving a retired grandmother in Ohio. She discovered her adult children had secretly put her suburban home up for sale while she was recovering from a minor knee surgery. And the brilliant legal trap she set with her real estate attorney will leave you absolutely speechless. You will not want to miss a single minute of how she turned the tables on them. Thank you so much for sitting with me tonight, for listening to my journey, and for choosing to protect your own dignity. Remember that your value is inherent, your boundaries are non-negotiable, and it is never too late to sit at the head of your own table. Take care of yourselves, stay strong, and I will see you right here in the next video.